The Shannon was gliding over the clouds, making its way swiftly toward Venus 1 platform. It was barely visible now, nearly completely under the surface, still sinking from the damage it had sustained. Its capture had furnished the Kraken with several prisoners, many injured, so they'd given permission for the UNS to send a medical ship to collect and treat them. A dozen paramedics on board were busy, preparing the medical bays and readying themselves for their arrival. The Shannon was designed for fast response to ships in distress, but occasionally a habitat would need its help. Venus 1 was neither. The platform carried just 100 crew, mostly technical staff for the atmosphere processing systems. The platform was surrounded by dozens of ship-sized, monstrous Kraken, swirling about it, defending their victory from the UNS ships in orbit. Shannon closed to the outer docking ring. Several small ships were already docked there, but he did not recognize them. Shannon settled into position, the metallic hull of the platform reshaping itself to accommodate the docking ports of another ship. The platform's interior was breached in several places, but bulkheads had sealed off the docking ring and upper levels, preventing the sulphurous smoke of Venus from flooding the station and killing its crew. As the data ports opened, the Shannon shuddered. The shrieking of the Kraken and strange musical voices were flooding the platform's virtual spaces, making Shannon uncomfortable. His thruster ports snapping shut reflexively, fuel flooding his main engines, ready to run at a moment's notice. Hoyer came to. He was laying on the floor of the bridge, but before his eyes had finished focusing, the pain from his leg struck, causing him to emit a muted wail. He could see Captain Cozy lying unconscious with Landau slumped over him. The lights were flickering and alerts were blaring. His leg was trapped under the tactical console, blood stains on it and the floor. Everyone else was unconscious or dead. He could see Nico had a broken neck, slumped over the navigation console a couple of meters away. By his feet, a railing had come loose. Grabbing the railing and using it as a lever, Hoyer freed his leg. It was crushed, blood flowing freely from the wound. The lack of actual gravity meant the utility nanites were working hard, clearing blood from the wound and pushing it to the floor. Hoyer pulled himself to his feet, using the railing as a support. He made his way to the captain before dropping down once more. With a yell of pain, he pulled the lifeless body of Landau off of the captain. Cozy stirred. His head and chest were pounding, but his neural computer pushed the pain aside. Hoyer had passed out from the exertion, his leg turning the floor plating red. Cozy gathered his wits and grabbed a medpack from the wall. He worked to save Hoyer, sealing the wound and injecting synthetic blood into him. He would live, though he would also need a new leg. Moments after docking, Shannon opened his doors. Beyond them, the clean and well-lit loading corridor was visible. A dozen Kraken stood in the space, each carrying 2 stretchers. They immediately boarded the Shannon, causing him to shudder once more, each a churning mass of twisted and dirty plating, without a face or even signs of facial features. Though they did not speak, they were not silent. Sounds of scraping and twisting metal accompanied every movement. As the Kraken placed patients on beds, a single humanoid figure became visible, stepping from the station to the Shannon. She was tall, more than 1.8 meters in height, a head taller than any Venusian human or Karnath. Her sleek silver skin and hair reflecting every ray of light. She shimmered as she passed through the doorway. Her walk, should you describe it as, flowed as though she were performing a dance. Though she appeared to be human in shape, she was equipped with a pair of tendrils, each positioned behind an ear, a part of the ear in truth. They were as long as she was tall, swaying in time to her movements, but not as a result of her movement. Each tipped with a bulb-like light, glowing gently, though they settled on no colour, instead shifting fluidly from one to the next. Once she'd stepped aboard, she stopped her advance, though she did not stop moving, her entire body possessed by some unheard music. She swayed and flowed with the rhythm. Even the colours of her tendril tips moved in harmony with her. Unlike the Kraken, she was silent, not a sound emanating from her as they transferred the injured. The 24 patients were soon comfortable on the Shenong, the Kraken swarming out of the ship and back to the captured platform. Once the Kraken had departed, the movements of the woman changed, swept along with the sound of her voice. 51 prisoners remain, lest the UNS attack again. As her statement came to a close, her movements carried her beyond the doors of the Shenong and out of sight. Shenong wasted no time, releasing from the ring and accelerating away as fast as the injured could handle, grateful to be free from the platform and its occupants. The dawn light began to filter into the city. Janna closed his eyes as it washed over him. Everything had gone according to plan. Lilypad, Hume, Vokler, Ona, Grace, Marconi, and Whitehall City had all joined Planter City. More than 50 million residents, all part of the half-fleet of cities, sailing the clouds together. Now that they had reached the sunny side, their engines were slowing and solar cells were drawing power, ensuring their safety from the war. Hundreds of ships had also joined the fleet. More than a dozen were armed and acting as a defence force, but most were small civilian shuttles and yachts, docked with cities or running supplies from place to place. Janna was pleased with the result. His plan had come together well, and the Kraken seemed to be respecting the fleet's position, keeping the battle away from them. Planter Council had even voted him in as the city's representative in the fleet. Each city had done similar, except Grace City, who had a queen sitting on the council instead. Janna turned away from the windows and sat at his desk before accessing the virtual council chambers, the other city representatives logging in for the planned meeting. Hoya had regained consciousness. He could see the captain carrying the body of Rylan, carefully placing it alongside the bodies of others. Parley was the only other living crewman, trying to get the ship's sensors back. Cozy had finished moving the dead when he noticed that Hoya was awake again, alerted by a painful grunt of him trying to get up. "Stay down, Lieutenant," Cozy called. "Your leg is in bad shape and we cannot contact medical." Cozy moved over and crouched by him, looking at his leg. "You're going to need a new one." A monitor flickered to life, showing a diagram of the ship. Decks 4 through 12 were breached, the reactor offline. Cozy moved over to Parley. Casting his eyes over the screen, he suppressed his sadness. Only 38 crew were still alive, along with 6 others, probably the paramedics. 154 crew and a dozen paramedics dead. But worse still, the main computer was showing as destroyed. Every crewman's backups were gone. Swallowing his anger, he accessed his neural computer, sending a message to all crew. "If you're alive and awake, confirm and report status." Cozy turned to Parley. "We need to get external sensors up." Both began working, while Hoyer tried to access the net, though it seemed as though Venus' orbit was blanketed in signal jamming. From his position, he couldn't be much help. The bridge system's out of reach, leaving him to sit and hope. Angel could see stars, a large hole in the med bay wall. Utility nanites had made a grey haze over it, holding in the air as much as possible. She felt numb, not from injury. She had only suffered some minor cuts and bruises. It was the dead. Dozens of bodies scattered around the bay. Most were crew of the Hastur, but some were from the Agassi, paramedics like her. All she could do was work, save what few people were still alive. Dr. Weller's injuries were serious, her left eye crushed and her left arm laying on the floor. Angel worked to save her when an engineer came into the room. She didn't speak, instead heading over to the fabricators. She located a set of printed fingers and quickly began replacing the stubs of others, an injury from the initial attack, though her abdomen was damaged as well, synthetic organs visible and a piece of shrapnel in the wound. "I'll be with you in a moment," Angel called, but Chief Petty Officer Lane shook her head. "Don't worry about me, Doc. The ship needs help more than I do." She turned and left the bay, headed for the lower decks. Lane's suit auto-sealed as she descended from deck 6 to 10. The utility nanites too thin to stop the leaks. The pressure in engineering was less than 40 kp, not enough to breathe. The uniforms of other crewmen had sealed as well, though most were dead. The main reactor was offline and breached. Safety systems prevented it from exploding. The whole bay was a wreck. None were alive, and through a breach in the hull, she could see Venus. It was close. The Hastur was losing orbit, perhaps 20 minutes before atmospheric drag would bring her down, when she received a message from the captain. "Captain, this is CPO Lane. I am looking through a hole in the hull. We are only 800 kilometers from Venus's atmosphere. If we don't get in the lift soon, we will be breathing clouds." Sending the report, she climbed through the hole, out onto the hull, carefully making her way toward the main engines, stopping at an access panel a few meters from them. Lane worked quickly, pulling the panel and manually pumping fuel into engine 3. A half dozen pumps would be enough, so she climbed down toward the engine. Droplets of fuel were leaking from the system, but nothing to worry about. Climbing into the engine, she manually turned the fuel nozzle fully open before retrieving the plasma torch from her belt. "Captain, I'm going to start engine 3 for a 5-second burn. It should give you time to save the crew. Good luck." She turned the plasma torch to the fuel pouring into the reaction chamber and pulled the trigger.